Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
There was no shouting, no slammed doors. In fact, she barely looked up from her phone when she said it. We were sitting on the couch. I just turned off the TV and reached for her hand, something I hadn't done in a while, and she pulled away like I'd asked for her bank password. She gave this dry little laugh and said, "You know, men only want one thing." It wasn't angry, just dismissive, like she was explaining gravity or some other universal truth. Then she stood up and walked to the kitchen without waiting for a response. That line echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like everything I'd done, working 12-hour days, managing both our bills, planning anniversaries she forgot, listening to her complain about everyone from her coworkers to her nail tech, was all just part of some male scheme to get one thing. I sat in the quiet of that room and looked around. The framed wedding photo above the fireplace. The wine glass she left half-finished on the side table. The flicker of her laptop still open from her online shopping spree. A marriage that, to anyone else, probably looked fine. I used to think silence was dangerous in relationships. But that night, I realized silence can be a weapon too, especially when it's the only thing keeping you from saying something unforgivable. I just got up, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside. The air was cold, but it helped. I sat on the porch swing and stared out at the street. The same cul-de-sac where we used to walk hand in hand when we first moved in. Back when things felt lighter. Before she started treating me like background noise. It's funny. The moment you realize your partner doesn't see you as a partner at all, but as a caricature, something changes in you. I went back inside after a while. She was already in bed, scrolling on her phone like the conversation had never happened. I didn't climb in next to her. I took a blanket and slept on the couch. She didn't ask why. Over the next few days, I kept my tone light, polite. I was friendly, even helpful. But there was no warmth in my help, no curiosity in my questions. Just a deliberate courtesy that I knew would feel unsettling if she ever paid attention. In her mind, she'd said what she said and moved on. To her, that line was probably nothing more than a snide joke she thought I was too fragile to handle. A throwaway comment to reinforce some pseudo-empowerment her best friend fed her over one too many brunches. But I heard it clearly. Men only want one thing. And so I started thinking about what that one thing meant in our marriage. To her, it was just intimacy. Some transactional, primal act that she believed gave her power by withholding it. But to me, it had never just been that. It was connection. Intimacy. It was reaching for someone and knowing they wanted you back. Because they cared. Because they saw you. Because they knew how hard you were trying. I realized I hadn't felt that in a long time. She used to meet me at the door when I got home. Now she didn't even look up from her phone. We used to talk before bed. Now, we stared at separate screens in the same room. Our anniversary passed last month, and she spent the whole evening too tired. I'd cooked. She'd eaten in silence. But that night on the porch, I understood something I'd refused to admit. She didn't think I was worth showing up for anymore. So I stopped showing up too. I just started documenting the things I had overlooked for too long. The comments she made when she thought I wasn't listening. The way she spoke about me to her friends, passive-aggressive digs cloaked as sarcasm. How she never made an effort to initiate anything, not even a simple hug, unless she needed something. I kept mental notes at first. Then I started keeping real ones, dates, observations, even screenshots of text messages that stung more than she probably realized. You'd be surprised how fast your mind clears once you stop trying to fix something someone else has already discarded. I stopped checking her location on our shared app. I turned off calendar reminders for her appointments. I stopped asking what she wanted for dinner. She didn't notice at first. When I did speak to her, I was never unkind. And I could tell, somewhere beneath her aloof exterior, something was starting to shift. Enough to make her glance at me a little longer, pause before speaking, start sentences she didn't finish. That's when I knew I had her attention, because I didn't. The shift was beginning. She didn't know it yet. But the man she'd pegged as a stereotype had already started moving on. And I would make sure she remembered what it felt like when the one thing she believed I existed for was no longer available. There's a kind of freedom that comes from letting go, especially when the person you're letting go of hasn't noticed you're slipping away. For the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own marriage. Not cold, just invisible in the way she had been treating me for months. The only difference now? I was watching what she'd do when she finally realized something had shifted. And she did, eventually. But not how you'd expect. It started with small things. She began asking where I was going in the evenings. Before, She'd barely glance up when I grabbed my keys. Now there was a hesitation, a glance, a half-formed question that usually ended in, "Never mind." She didn't know that while I wasn't staying late at work, I'd go to the gym, not just to kill time, but to get stronger, put something back into myself after spending years pouring it all into her. Then I'd walk a few laps around the park near our house, the one we used to go to during our first year of marriage. I was retracing old steps to understand how far I'd come and what I'd allowed myself to become. At home, I scaled back everything. No more morning coffee prepped for her before I left. No notes left by the door. No quiet reminders of errands or dry cleaning pickups. I stopped covering the mundane details of her life, the ones I'd always handled because I assumed it made things easier for both of us. Turns out, she wasn't nearly as efficient without me. The mail piled up. Her car sat with the gas light on for days. The leaky kitchen faucet dripped into the sink without pause. I watched it all unfold in silence, curious when she'd say something. She did, on a random Tuesday. "Why haven't you fixed the faucet?" I shrugged without looking up from my laptop. Didn't know it was broken. Her face twitched, like she wanted to argue but couldn't quite figure out how. It was the first time in a long while she looked at me with uncertainty instead of dismissal. And then there was her friend, Jessica, the one who always filled her head with phrases like, "Take control, don't cater to him. Men need to learn boundaries." The one who started showing up more often once my wife stopped sleeping with me. She was always smiling when I passed through the living room during their little pep talks, always giving me that smug glance like she had cracked some code on how to domesticate a man. I never liked her, because of how much my wife parroted her tone afterward. That air of superiority. That idea that affection was a favor to be rationed out when I'd earned it. So I started listening more carefully when they spoke. Not eavesdropping, just noticing. Like the time Jessica said, "If he's not stepping up, don't reward him. That's how you train them." And my wife laughed. That night, I moved all my clothes out of our shared closet and into the guest room. I think she expected me to come crawling back once I'd proven whatever point she assumed I was trying to make. I was rebalancing. Quietly, permanently. One Friday evening, a coworker named Lila approached me at the end of the day. We'd never spoken much outside of meetings, but she lingered by my desk longer than usual. "Hey," she said, almost nervously. "This might be out of line, but I saw your wife last night." I blinked. "Okay." She was at that Italian place downtown. Late dinner. With a guy? I didn't say anything, but it looked kind of personal. I nodded. "Thanks." She seemed surprised by my reaction, like she was expecting a defensive explosion or a desperate denial. But I already knew something was off. This just confirmed it. I went home, pulled out an old notebook, and added a simple line. "Thursday night, Trattoria Roma, eyewitness." Later that evening, she walked in humming. Not a care in the world. "You good?" she asked, pausing in the hallway. "Never better." I replied without looking at her. And I meant it. I was lighter. Every moment she treated me like an obligation. I felt more certain I was doing the right thing. She still hadn't grasped that I was removing not just that one thing she claimed men always wanted, but the everything she assumed I'd keep giving without question: my attention, my presence, my quiet loyalty. I went through our shared accounts and began separating what I could. I created a private folder for financial records. Updated passwords. Nothing secretive, just proactive. I went to dinner alone one evening, sat by the window, and read a book over a glass of wine. No pressure. No noise. Just a man reclaiming space in his own life. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was betraying anyone by enjoying myself. Because, truthfully, she had already left me emotionally. All I was doing was acknowledging the vacancy. The night before our next anniversary, she asked if I wanted to do anything. I looked up, genuinely curious. "For what?" "Our anniversary." I smiled. Didn't think we were still celebrating things that matter to me. She laughed nervously, unsure whether I was joking. She went to bed alone that night. And as I lay on the couch in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, I realized I hadn't been this at peace in a long time. It began with a dress. A sleek, black one she hadn't worn in years. The kind she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners or romantic nights out when she still cared about my gaze. I found it strange when she came into the living room wearing it on a Wednesday evening, acting like she was just feeling pretty. She didn't say where she was going. She just asked what I thought of the dress. She lingered for a moment, clearly expecting a compliment or even a sign of jealousy. I gave her nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd stopped giving her anything she could twist into control. That was the beginning of her shift. She began attempting warmth again, slipping into my space while I made coffee, asking how work was, even touching my arm as she passed by. They weren't real gestures. They were calculated, measured attempts to rewind something she thought she could manipulate back into place. But I wasn't the same man she'd been brushing off for months. One night, I came home late after spending a few hours at a boxing gym a friend had invited me to. My shirt was still damp, my hands bruised from the heavy bag. She looked up from the couch with something close to surprise, maybe even admiration. "You've been working out?" I shrugged, heading toward the kitchen. "Just staying sharp." She followed me in, leaning against the counter, studying me like I was suddenly unfamiliar. "That's good," she said, her voice soft. "You seem different lately." "I am," I said plainly. Then I walked past her without another word. She didn't follow me. The next weekend, her friend Jessica came over again. Their usual wine and gossip routine resumed, only this time, I didn't retreat to another room. I stayed in the hallway just long enough to hear something that changed everything. "Honestly, I didn't think he'd flip the script like this," my wife said, her voice tinged with something halfway between irritation and fear. Jessica snorted. "Because he never did before. You trained him too well." My wife laughed, but it sounded strained. "I just wanted him to see how much power I have in this relationship. That he should appreciate what I've been giving." Jessica didn't respond immediately. Then, with an edge I hadn't heard from her before, she said, "You don't give much, though." "Not really." There was silence. Then Jessica continued, "You act like you're owed everything just for existing. Meanwhile, he actually works, pays for things, supports you, and you talk about him like he's some house pet." My wife muttered something under her breath, too quiet to catch. Jessica sighed. "Look, I only ever encouraged you to stand up for yourself, not to treat him like trash. You keep pushing, and you'll lose him." "You used to say he was spineless," my wife snapped. "Yeah," Jessica said. "I was wrong." That sentence hit harder than I expected. I stood frozen, barely breathing, letting the truth settle in. Jessica, who had encouraged her to withhold, to manipulate, to mock, was now offering a backhanded confession. Because she had realized my wife had overplayed her hand. I moved away quietly before they noticed I'd been there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying their conversation, analyzing every word. Was Jessica simply trying to stir trouble between us now? Or was this her way of distancing herself from the fallout she saw coming? Whatever the reason, I knew what I had to do. The next day, I set up a recorder in the living room before I left for work. Just in case. I had a gut feeling Jessica would be back, and that the conversation would go deeper. I wasn't wrong. That evening, as I sat in my car down the block, windows cracked, engine off, I listened through a live feed on my phone. Jessica's voice came through, crisp and clear. "He's checked out. You do realize that, right?" "I don't know what else to do," my wife said, frustration raw in her voice. "He won't touch me. He doesn't talk. It's like I don't exist." Jessica paused. Then her tone changed. "Honestly, I told you to stand your ground because I thought he needed to be shaken. But you crossed a line. When you told him men only want one thing? That wasn't bold. That was cruel." My wife didn't reply. "And here's the part you never saw coming," Jessica added. "He was always the better one. You just convinced yourself otherwise because it made you feel powerful." There was a rustling sound, like someone shifting on the couch. Then, quietly, almost inaudibly, "Do you still think he'd take me back?" Jessica gave a short laugh, one without humor. "I think he already left. You just haven't seen the door close yet." That was enough. I saved the recording and emailed a copy to myself, storing it under a folder labeled simply, "Clarity." That night, I came home later than usual. She had dinner ready, a rare occasion. I thanked her, sat down, and ate in silence. She watched me more than she ate. Her eyes searched my face for something: approval, maybe, forgiveness. But I wasn't offering either. "Is everything okay?" she asked eventually. "Yeah," I replied between bites. "Everything's finally making sense." And I meant it. I had the truth, and the weight of her own words. The lesson she tried to teach me had boomeranged. I had taken away the one thing she thought she could mock. And now, for the first time, she looked afraid she'd never get it back. The next week passed like the countdown to a controlled demolition. That part of me had gone silent, like the eye of a storm finally reaching the center. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't trying to fix anything, because I had stopped needing her to be anything at all. I spent those days tying up threads. Every bill, every shared subscription, every piece of paperwork with both our names on it. I reviewed them all. I moved funds where they needed to go, separated assets that were easy to untangle, and contacted the financial advisor she forgot we shared. By the time Friday arrived, my side of the life we built together was clean, orderly, and entirely self-sustaining. Then I made the call to the attorney. I just wanted closure that would hold up in court. During our first meeting, I played him the recording, Jessica's voice cutting through the tension, my wife's silence hanging like a noose. He listened without interruption, then nodded like he'd seen 100 marriages fall this same way. "You'll want to keep that," he said. "It'll be useful when she tries to paint a different picture." He wasn't wrong. The mediation was scheduled for the following Thursday. My wife still didn't know. She was back in what I could only describe as crisis performance mode, making dinner again, dressing in ways she hadn't in years, sending me texts during the day with emojis and soft questions like, "Can we talk soon?" But she never apologized. Never acknowledged what she'd said, what she'd done. It was like she thought intimacy could be traded for forgiveness. And that told me everything I needed to know about her idea of love. When Thursday came, I told her I needed to meet someone about a work-related legal issue. She didn't ask many questions, too relieved that I was talking to her again without the distance she'd been sensing. She didn't know I was headed to a private mediation room downtown. When she finally arrived, confused, cautious, led in by her own attorney, I was already seated with mine, the documents arranged neatly on the table. "What is this?" she asked, eyes darting between us. "Division of assets," I said calmly. "Preliminary steps for separation." She blinked, stunned into silence. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't hear it. "I don't understand. Why now? I thought we were doing better." I handed a flash drive to my attorney. He plugged it into the laptop and clicked play. Her friend's voice filled the room again. Every line from that conversation, every confession, every revelation of manipulation and regret. My wife paled, her mouth opening slowly, like air was suddenly a luxury. She tried to interrupt, but the mediator raised a hand. "We'll let the full recording play. It's important for context." By the time it ended, she looked like a woman staring at her own funeral. "I didn't know you heard all that," she whispered, voice cracking. "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't know. You didn't think. You just assumed I'd stay because I always had." Her lawyer tried to pivot, asking if reconciliation was on the table. Mine responded with a firm, "No." We went through the motions of asset division. I was fair, generous, even. I didn't want to punish her. I just wanted distance. The meeting ended without fanfare. She followed me outside, trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "It was just talk. I didn't think you'd actually leave." I finished for her. "You thought I'd beg, that I'd grovel, that I'd chase after a version of you that doesn't exist anymore." "I messed up," she said quietly. "You weaponized the one thing I asked for in return," I replied. "Not intimacy, not submission, just connection, respect." She stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine. "You didn't just break trust," I said. "You broke character. You let someone else speak through you. And now you're standing in the wreckage, surprised that the walls fell down." "But Jessica didn't send the text," I cut in. "You did. Jessica didn't mock me. You did. Jessica didn't push me out of the bed, out of your life, out of your respect. That was all you." And that's when I knew it was over, not just legally, but spiritually. There was no partnership left to salvage. No memory that could stitch together what we'd both allowed to fall apart. I got into my car, left her standing there on the curb, staring after me like I'd vanished. In a way, I had. When I reached home, the silence was different. No tension, no weight, just stillness and the knowledge that I'd stopped fighting for someone who never thought I'd stop. I poured myself a drink and stepped out onto the porch. I watched the neighborhood move around me, families coming home, dogs barking in the distance, a light breeze tugging at the wind chimes. It felt like the beginning of a life I should have started years ago. The first text came that night. I was sitting in the dark, one leg resting on the coffee table, a glass of whiskey untouched in my hand. I hadn't even turned on the lights since I got home. I didn't need to. The quiet was enough. Her message was short. "Please don't do this. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long while because of what it didn't say. There was no ownership, no acknowledgement of what had led us to that mediation room. It was a reflex, the same reflex that had kept her so confident all these years. She thought she could still steer the outcome if she just cried at the right moment or said the right words. But something irreversible had already taken place. It was about perception. Once you see someone for who they are, not the person they pretended to be, or the version you convinced yourself to accept, You can't unsee it. And what I saw now was someone who viewed commitment as leverage and intimacy as currency. I didn't reply. Over the next week, she tried again. Through texts, voice messages, even a handwritten letter I found taped to my front door. Each attempt followed the same pattern: soft regret, vague nostalgia, emotional bait without substance. She wrote things like, "I just got lost in the wrong advice," and, "You know deep down I never stopped loving you." But none of it rang true. Because if she had really believed any of that, she would have fought for us before I ever had to walk away. I ignored her because there was nothing left to say. Then came the final visit. She showed up unannounced one Sunday morning, standing at my doorstep in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, eyes swollen from what I could only assume was another sleepless night. She looked different, smaller, somehow. Not physically, but in spirit. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She stood silently for a few seconds, then said, "You really meant it." She glanced around the porch like she was seeing it for the first time. "I thought once you cooled off, you'd come back. That we could fix it." I leaned against the doorframe. There was no fight. There was nothing to cool off from. She stepped forward, hesitating. I don't know why I said what I said. It wasn't about you. It was about me, about how I felt. Trapped, maybe. Like I had to prove something. I raised an eyebrow. "So, to prove you weren't trapped, you insulted the one person who always supported you?" I was scared, she whispered. "No. You were arrogant," I said, calm but firm. "You thought I'd always be there. That you could push me as far as you wanted, and I'd still come back." She blinked rapidly, tears forming. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." "I didn't leave," I corrected. "You just watched me walk out the door you opened." She tried again. "We had good years. We can get back there." I shook my head. "We had moments, not years. And those moments were built on the version of me who kept forgiving, who kept hoping. That version doesn't live here anymore." Tears finally broke free, trailing down her cheeks. "You said men only want one thing," I said, voice steady. "I gave you my attention, my loyalty, my time. I stood by you when you shut down, when you withdrew, when you treated me like a burden. All I ever wanted was partnership, not a favor. But you made me into a stereotype so you could justify treating me like one." "I was wrong," she said. "I know." Her shoulders trembled. "So what now? Is this really it?" I looked her in the eye. "You ended intimacy. I ended the marriage." She took a breath, maybe to argue or beg again, but then something in her changed. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. No last-minute hugs or pleading. Just the slow, quiet steps of someone who finally understood that consequences weren't threats, they were answers. I watched her drive off. And when she turned the corner, I closed the door without looking back. Later that evening, I packed up the last of the things that still carried her shadow, a drawer of old anniversary cards, faded photos from better years, and a couple of gifts I'd never thrown away because I thought they still meant something. I boxed them, labeled the top, "Not mine anymore," and placed it in the garage. Then I turned on some music, poured a drink, and walked out to the back patio. The sky was painted in soft streaks of orange and blue. A breeze cut through the trees like a final curtain closing on an old, worn-out play. And I smiled, because I had taken back the one thing she mocked. Not intimacy, but self-worth. And the moment she realized she could no longer define what I needed, she wanted everything back. But I'd already left the table.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.